I lived in Waynesboro, Virginia, for about 5 years, less than 10 miles from the Blue Ridge Parkway's north entrance and Skyline Drive south entrance. I used to take bike rides along Skyline Drive all the time and always kept a year-long membership, but only rode during the day. One night, I was having a particularly hard time settling in for bed, so I decided to fire up my bike and ride up to the first overlook on Skyline Drive, only about a mile into the park. It was around 11 p.m. when I got there, and it was pitch black. I killed the engine and immediately felt uneasy. I'm not someone who gets spooked in the dark. In fact, I usually prefer it. You can see people before they see you, and you're practically invisible unless someone is specifically looking for you. I find that kind of natural privacy comforting. But not up there. The darkness was thick and suffocating, worse than anything I'd ever experienced outside of a cave, worse than any moonless night on the Appalachian Trail. A deep sense of unease washed over me. There's nothing up here but wildlife, I reassured myself. I had my .44 revolver, something I always carried when I lived and hiked in the Pacific Northwest, where bear encounters weren't uncommon. It was tucked into my CCW holster, so I knew I had the upper hand against anything that might be lurking out there, rattlesnakes included. I sat there in the dark, leaning against my bike, staring at the few lights in the valley below. After about 10 minutes, I physically felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I had only spent 27 months in Iraq, but I remembered that precise feeling. Someone was watching me. Something bad was coming. It was the same sensation I get just before incoming fire or an attack. I'm no psychic or anything, but it's something vets with real field time will tell you. You can feel hateful eyes on you. The overlook had a sheer drop, or close to it, so I wasn't worried about anything coming from that direction. But behind me, the thick, untamed woods stretched into the mountainside. My mind started running through possibilities. Meth heads creeping through the Appalachian Trail, bears or worse. That area wasn't unfamiliar with random violence. Still feeling unsettled, I moved to sit on the waist-high stone wall marking the overlook's edge, facing the woods. Now, you might ask, Grizz, why not just turn on your bike and use the headlights? Sure, that would have helped me see what was nearby, but my bike is loud, and the last thing I wanted was to draw attention to myself. Plus, the light would have just night-blinded me to anything lurking just beyond its reach, and the noise would have masked any approaching movement. No thanks. I'd rather watch and listen. I sat there for another 10 minutes, my anxiety mounting. I heard a few noises, but nothing that seemed out of place for a forest at night. Eventually, I decided it was time to leave since the feeling wasn't going away. As I said, I had the firepower to handle anything playing games, so if it got stupid, it would be in for a serious surprise. That I hopped onto my Suzuki, fired it up, and started heading for the gate. Anyone who lives in the country and rides a bike knows how active wildlife gets on roads that aren't traveled often at night. Since the park was technically closed, I had to ride around the gate to get in. I hadn't seen a single other person or vehicle since leaving Waynesboro. The speed limit was 30 miles per hour, but I was crawling along at 15 miles per hour, keeping an eye out for deer. The last thing I needed was to wreck my bike and end up lying there all night until someone happened to find me in the morning. And that's when I saw it. The term almost a deer fits, but it's not quite right. It looked like a deer drawn by someone who had never seen one before, but had it vaguely described to them. It stood on the left side of the road, near the mountain, and I saw its eyes long before my headlights fully revealed it. It was huge, easily the biggest deer I'd ever seen, and the lack of antlers at that time of year suggested it was a doe. But the head was wrong. It was almost bovine in shape, but attached to a deer's frame. The legs were too long for its body, think maned wolf proportions, and its chest was freakishly broad. I've always been unnerved by deformed wildlife, and this was no exception. That I needed to get it to move. Otherwise, I'd have to pass within just a few feet of it. I wasn't about to ride 30-plus miles in the opposite direction to leave through another gate, but I also wasn't about to risk spooking it into charging me. I stopped about 30 feet away and tried to scare it off. I flicked my headlights from low to high. Nothing. I revved the engine. Nothing. I honked the horn. Still nothing. Annoyed, I rested the bike on its kickstand, left it idling, and stepped off. I shouted at the thing, but it didn't move. So I walked over to the other side of the road to find something to throw near it, hoping that would scare it off. The second I stepped into the opposite lane, It rose onto its hind legs that I froze, my hand instinctively going to my weapon. I wasn't about to get charged by some deranged, malformed deer. IT took two stiff, unnatural steps toward the center of the lane and stopped again, staring right at me. Then, out of nowhere, it violently shook its head like a dog with a chew toy, took another short step, and then sprinted, on two legs, several strides before vanishing into the darkness on the right side of the road that I backed up, mounted my bike, kicked up the stand, and turned the light toward where it had gone. There was a steep drop-off on that side, a 70 to 80-degree incline compared to the roadway. And yet its head was still visible, peeking just over the edge, still watching me. The drop-off was about 40 to 50 feet deep. There was no way it was just standing at the bottom. That I cracked the throttle and got the hell out of there. Wildlife be damned that I never rode Skyline Drive alone at night again after that. There are things out there we don't understand. Or maybe they just visit for a while. Whatever it was, it didn't belong in those mountains. And as far as I'm concerned, it can stay wherever the hell it came from. This keeps the original tone, length, and atmosphere while refining the storytelling for a smoother read. Let me know if you need any further tweaks. Here's your rewritten text, keeping the meaning, structure, and length intact while refining readability and flow. His shoulder was broken, his arm hanging limply at his side like a loose bag of sand. Sweat forced itself out of his pores, and the skin on his hands peeled from the burns. It was a terrible situation, and things weren't looking any better. But he did have one thing going for him. He didn't care whether he survived. "Are you all right?" I asked, immediately cringing at how ridiculous the question sounded. He looked up at me, his eyes swollen, nearly shut. "Yeah, I'm just peachy," he said, every word dripping with sarcasm. "Sorry, I just don't know what else to say," I replied. "There isn't much to say, is there? Unless you want to talk about—" "No," I cut him off before he could finish. "Let's talk about how we're going to get you down from here." He leaned over, wincing, and peeked over the side of the cliff. "How about you just give me a little shove? That should do the trick." "Very funny. You know I'm not going to do that," I retorted. He glared at me. "Then maybe I should give you a shove and make things quicker. How about we focus on the positive?" I shot back. "You know how this ends," he muttered. "If you try to save me, you're just going to get yourself killed, especially with—" "We don't know that." I interrupted. That I started gathering the supplies we had, trying to come up with some kind of plan to keep us alive long enough to get out of this mess. Besides, we've been best friends since what, grade school? If I haven't tossed you off a cliff by now, I'm not going to start today. I stepped to the edge and glanced down. The wind whipped against my face, sending a chill through me. Even though it was spring, the air still held enough bite to make me shiver. The sun was sinking toward the horizon. It would be dark soon. If I didn't hurry, we'd be stuck up here all night. But that's when my right knee buckled as he kicked me hard in the back of the leg, that I stumbled forward, my knees slamming into the ground, rolling me dangerously close to the edge. My hands shot out, grabbing onto a log, barely saving me from a deadly fall. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I gasped, lying on the ground, struggling to catch my breath. "I told you, this only ends one way. Might as well get it over with," he said. That I stared at him, barely believing what I was hearing. "You're serious?" "Look at me," he said. "I'm in excruciating pain. My shoulder is destroyed. My hands are burned. I'm not going to be able to climb down. And even if I could, there's no safety from. We have to try," I insisted. "I didn't bring you here to die. I wish you hadn't brought me here at all," he shot back. There was no way to know this was going to happen. I said. That he looked at me, doubt clouding his expression. I turned away, focusing on packing what I hoped was the right combination of supplies. The pack couldn't be too heavy. I needed to lower him down, and might even have to carry him. That I tied together all the rope we had, double-checked the knots, and clipped the carabiner to his climbing rig, making sure it was still intact and that the fire hadn't damaged it. I stepped back, satisfied with my work. He looked at it too, unimpressed. "Really?" he scoffed. "This is your big plan?" "Sure," I said, smiling, proud of my ingenuity. "Why not just ring the dinner bell for every predator in the area while you dangle me like bait?" "You know what? You're right," I said. "It's not worth all this trouble." Then I raised my foot and shoved his good arm, sending him toppling over the edge of the cliff. That I heard him scream as he fell. Then silence. "Thank God," I sighed. I was so tired of listening to his whining. I heard that. He shouted from over the edge that I stepped up and peered down. He was dangling about 10 feet from the top. Oh, damn, I said. I thought I killed you. I chuckled. Then he looked up at me, furious. You bastard. Well, isn't that what you wanted? For me to throw you off the cliff? How's that working out for you? He glared daggers at me. Funny how facing death makes you appreciate life a little more, I said. You're going to pay for this. For saving your life? I scoffed. Okay, I'll take the blame for that. I began the long, grueling process of lowering him down. I just hoped we had enough rope. The strain quickly wore me down. Sweat dripped down my face, my arms burned, and my hands started slipping. I barely managed to recover in time to stop him from crashing into the ground. I slowed the rope at the cost of some nasty rope burns. Tying it off to a tree, I leaned over to check on him. You okay? I called out that I couldn't see him clearly, but it looked like he raised an arm, that I grabbed my binoculars and peered down, only to see he was flipping me off. Same to you, I yelled back. I need a break. You'll be fine for a few minutes. His only response was to slump his head that I guessed he was taking a nap. Sighing, I sat down next to the log and pulled out a water bottle, taking a long drink. After a few minutes, I pulled out my knife and cut a few strips from the bottom of my shirt, wrapping them tightly around my palms before tying them off. Why didn't I think of this before I started lowering him? I was about to begin another round of lowering him when I noticed something strange. The rope was vibrating. That's weird. What are you doing down there? I called, stepping to the edge and peering over. My spine turned to ice. He wasn't there. Adrian, I shouted. No response. Adrian, I yelled again, my voice cracking with urgency, trying and failing not to think of the Rocky movies. I pulled on the rope. It came up far too easily. I reeled it in completely, dreading what I would find at the end. Nothing. No Adrian. No sign of him at all. The rope wasn't cut. It looked torn, or worse, chewed. I stared at it for a long time, my mind overwhelmed by the horrible events that had led us here. Fear crushed me, and I collapsed to the ground, scanning my surroundings frantically. Every tree, every bush seemed to be hiding something, watching me that I could feel it. And then, my mind betrayed me, replaying the moment this nightmare had begun. We had made it to the top of the cliff and celebrated by building a small fire and making coffee while setting up our tents. Adrian had actually been in a good mood for once, if you can believe that. We sat by the fire well past midnight, talking, laughing. The next morning, though, his mood had shifted. Way to keep me up all night. Expletive, he muttered, pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee. I frowned. What are you talking about? Don't play innocent, he snapped. You were circling my tent all night, growling and pawing at the ground, trying to scare me. My stomach dropped. Adrian, I was asleep in my tent the whole time. I knocked out the second my head hit the pillow. His expression shifted, hesitation creeping into his features. Then what the hell was making all that noise? Maybe, I swallowed. Maybe I was snoring and you heard that? He shook his head. Trust me, this wasn't snoring. Well, if it wasn't me then, I narrowed my eyes at him. Wait a minute. I see what you're doing. What am I doing? He asked, staring into his coffee cup. You're trying to freak me out with some campfire horror story, hoping I'll lose it. I'm telling you it's not some campfire story. It really happened. Yeah, okay, I said, making it clear I wasn't buying it. I mean it, he snapped, anger rising in his voice. Okay. I relented, raising my hands. Don't get your panties in a twist. You better, he started, but then stopped. His eyes locked onto something behind me. I'm not falling for that, I scoffed. Then I heard it. A snap. A branch breaking behind me. I turned and saw. I shook my head violently, forcing the memory away. Asterisk not now. I can't think about that now. Asterisk I had to focus. I had to find Adrian. Shoving aside my fear, I stood up and checked my supplies, double-checking that the rope was still securely tied to the tree. I refused to look around, afraid of what I might see lurking in the shadows. Once everything was set, I stared down at the deadly drop beneath me, muttered a quick prayer, and jumped. Descending was agonizing. The pack on my back made balance difficult, and my already rope-burned hands screamed in protest despite the makeshift wrappings. I moved slowly, carefully, partly for my own safety, but mostly because I was terrified of what I might find. I kept telling myself that maybe, just maybe, his rope had frayed on the rocks and snapped. Maybe I'd find him lying on an outcropping below. Unconscious, maybe, but alive. That hope flickered when I noticed an opening in the rock wall. My rope hung in a straight line with it. Adrian's probably had too. Dread churned in my stomach. I adjusted my position and swung toward the rock face, grabbing onto a larger rock and pulling myself toward it. Securing my footing, I reeled in my rope and stashed it before climbing down to the ledge in front of the opening. A cave. It was dark as pitch. Even though the sun had just set, daylight didn't seem to touch the entrance. I hesitated. Then, pulling out my flashlight, I slowly swept the beam inside. The cave was massive. I stepped in cautiously, my head easily clearing the ceiling by 3 feet. Curiosity warred with fear as I shined my light along the rough walls. No markings, no signs of it being man-made, which made it worse, because if this place had formed naturally, what had made it their home? I shuddered. The deeper I went, the colder it became. I hugged myself, fighting off the chill. Then I smelled it. 2 distinct scents, intertwining. The first was the scent of fire, not like a raging wildfire, but more like a campfire that had burned low. The second was much less comforting. The putrid stench of decay. Something had died in here. I hesitated, second-guessing my decision to come inside. And then, just as I was about to turn back, I snapped back to the present, remembering why I was in this cave to begin with. Adrian was still missing. If he had come down here, he hadn't been dragged. At least, I didn't see any struggle marks on the rough stone floor. But then again, it was hard to tell. I suddenly stopped. The passageway split in two. I shone my flashlight down the right tunnel, then the left. Neither offered a clue as to which was the correct path. I stared at both for a long moment, then mentally flipped a coin and went right. I had barely taken a few steps when a strong wind hit me, carrying with it the twin stench of fire and decay. I nearly turned back, nearly chose the other path instead. But if Adrian was anywhere, it was here. At least, I hope he was. As I walked, the glow of firelight flickered ahead. I switched off my flashlight and followed it, creeping forward as quietly as I could. Then I turned a corner and saw him. Adrian lay motionless in front of a fire. He didn't look injured, at least, no more than he already had been. I saw no fresh blood around him, but I did see the pile of bones stacked behind him. A cold, sickening dread settled in my stomach. It took every ounce of willpower I had to step forward. I had to check on him. I had to get him out of here. Then suddenly I froze, because the rock that had been sitting by the fire moved. A massive shape shifted, rising up from its place near the flames. I knew what it was instantly. The size, the thick dark hair covering it, the thing that had been stalking us. I stumbled back, ducking behind the tunnel wall, trembling so hard I could barely think. 2 choices: fight or hide. I had nothing that could kill it. No gun, not even a real weapon, just a pocket knife, and I knew damn well that wouldn't do a thing. I had to hide. My mind raced for a solution. Asterisk anything asterisk. When it hit me, I turned and rushed back to the other passage as silently as I could. I had assumed it was another long tunnel, but when I stepped inside, I found it almost immediately blocked. I raised my flashlight, and what I saw made my stomach turn. A pile, not of rocks, but of clothes. Shirts, pants, shoes, backpacks, some stacked nearly to the ceiling. And every single piece of it was stained with blood. Some were torn, others shredded. None had been spared. I remembered hearing about hikers going missing in this park. I had brushed it off as the usual stuff, people getting lost, slipping into ravines, vanishing like they sometimes did in deep wilderness. But I had been wrong, so very, very wrong. Panic screamed at me to run. But I couldn't. Adrian was still in there. I had to help him. Somehow. I stared at the mountain of discarded belongings, my horror slowly morphing into an idea. I grabbed an armful of clothes and dug my way toward the bottom of the pile. How many people had to go missing before a Real investigation started? I pushed the thought away, working as fast as I could, stuffing myself into the lowest part of the pile and pulling the clothing back over me, leaving only a tiny space to see through. By now, the dim light from the cave entrance was nearly gone. I unzipped my pack as quietly as possible, making sure I had easy access to anything I might need. Then I settled in, forcing myself to stay completely still. A wave of exhaustion hit me, heavier than I expected. I hadn't realized how tired I was. I turned, and it was there, dark, massive, hunched on two legs, its posture low, coiled, as if preparing to spring. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. "Adrian," I whispered. He didn't move. "What?" he hissed, barely parting his lips, as if speaking too loudly would make the thing attack. "Is that what you heard?" "Yeah." His voice was hoarse, strained. "I'm thinking so." The creature circled us. Slow, purposeful. Its sharp teeth dripped with saliva. "What do we do?" I asked through clenched teeth. Adrian's jaw was tight. "How the hell should I know?" The thing kept moving. Closer. "Did you bring a gun?" I whispered. "No." "Did you?" I slowly shook my head, and the creature stopped, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. It understood. It knew. No weapons. No defense. It rose and lunged. I screamed and tried to run, but my foot caught on a log, and I crashed backward. The impact knocked the wind out of me. But in the end, that saved my life, because instead of ripping into my chest, it sailed over me instead. I turned, gasping for breath, just in time to see Adrian, pocket knife in hand. The monster saw it too. It snarled. Adrian didn't hesitate. He plunged the knife into its chest. The thing shrieked, but it didn't stop. It twisted midair, slamming into him, pinning his arms to his sides. There was a crunch, then they rolled, right into the fire. Adrian howled as the flames licked his skin. I scrambled up, reaching for him, but before I could, he grabbed a burning piece of wood and swung. The firebrand connected hard with the creature's face. It screeched, whimpering like a wounded animal, then vanished, as quickly and silently as it had come. I don't know how long I sat there, shaking, staring into the trees where it had disappeared. But eventually, I crawled over to Adrian, who lay motionless beside the fire. "Are you okay?" I asked, rolling him onto his back. He screamed in pain as I moved his injured shoulder. "Shit, sorry," I muttered. "Get away from me," he groaned. I ignored him, helping him into a sitting position and looking at his burned hand. "You all right?" I asked again. He grimaced. Asterisk, yeah. Asterisk, just peachy. I woke with a start, but I didn't know why. Heart pounding, I reached for my flashlight, ready to flick it on. Then I heard it, sniffing, right outside the pile. Slow, deep, searching. I held my breath and prayed. I froze. Every ounce of my focus was on being as still as possible. The sniffing grew louder. I didn't dare open my eyes. It felt stupid, irrational even, but some primal part of me was convinced that if I opened them, it would see me. And that would be it. I could feel it getting closer. I fought back the panic clawing in my chest, the instinct to run screaming in my head. That was exactly what it wanted. Instead, I clenched my eyes shut and forced my thoughts elsewhere. The last sunrise I had seen, the warmth of it on my skin, hoping it wouldn't be the last one I would ever see. Then I felt it, the snout pressed against the layer of clothes in front of me, and paused, as if deciding whether to eat me now or save me for later. I held my breath. The snout lingered for an eternity. Then, just as silently as it had come, it withdrew. I waited. It was still there, watching, waiting for me to move. I didn't. For what felt like hours, I stayed frozen, my body screaming in protest. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. My limbs ached. My muscles throbbed. I had to stretch. I stood, quietly, easing the stiffness from my arms and legs. Then I sank back down, making sure I was covered by the mound of clothes again. My stomach twisted in hunger. I risked a tiny bit of light through my fingers and pulled out a granola bar. Opening it silently was torture. It took half an hour, and my only reward was thirst. I sipped my water sparingly, forcing myself not to gulp it down. I checked my watch. 1:00 a.m. the exact time Adrian had heard the growling. My gut told me the creature would be out hunting. I had to move. I pushed the clothes off me, grabbed my flashlight, and crept back toward the main cave. My footsteps echoed, making me whip around every few seconds, convinced it was right behind me. By some miracle, I reached the fire without having a full panic attack. The flames had burned low, casting a dim orange glow along the walls. Adrian was still lying in the same spot. He wasn't moving. My heart pounded as I crouched beside him, listening. A faint breath. Adrian, I whispered, shaking him gently. Come on, man. We gotta go. No response. I glanced around. The cave was too quiet. Adrian. I tried again, shaking him harder. This time his eyes fluttered open, just barely. He lifted a trembling hand, shading his face from my flashlight. You still with me, buddy? I asked. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Here, I said, holding my water bottle to his lips. Drink. He took a few small sips and seemed to perk up just a bit. Then he whispered, Why? I frowned. Why what? His voice was hoarse. Weak. Asterisk, why are you here? Asterisk. I swallowed hard. I came to rescue you. Adrian gave me a tired, broken smile. Leave me. I'm not doing that. A howl echoed in the distance. It sent an icy spike through my spine. I had no way of knowing how far away it was, or if it was celebrating another victim. I turned back to Adrian. Okay, listen. I'm gonna go, but I'll be back when I know for sure it's out of the cave. I gave him another sip of water. Just hang on, all right? He closed his eyes and let his head fall back. I stared at him for a moment, then jumped to my feet and ran. Back through the tunnels. Back to my hiding spot. I barely had time to bury myself beneath the clothes before I heard it. Something lumbering past. I had cut it too close. I needed to figure out its routine. I stole a glance at my watch. 1:37 a.m. I drained the last swallow of water and lay down, exhaustion finally dragging me under. I woke some time later. The cave was dimly lit. A pale glow seeped through the entrance, though it didn't reach my hiding spot. I blinked groggily, then stopped. A massive shadow blocked the light. It was standing right in front of me. I went still, stone, breathless. What was it doing? Did it know I was here? Was it toying with me? Sweat poured down my face. I gripped my flashlight tight, knowing it wouldn't do anything against that thing. But if I was going to die, I'd go down fighting. Then, something fell on top of me. Not heavy, not the creature. I didn't dare move. I lay there, heart hammering, listening. The thing waited. Then after a long moment, it walked away. I waited until I was sure it was gone. Then I flicked my flashlight on, and immediately wished I hadn't. The pile of clothes on top of me was new, a shirt, shorts, underwear, and a bra. My stomach churned. The latest victim. I shut off the light, squeezing my eyes closed, trying to block it out. I wanted to help her, but I couldn't. I was barely surviving myself. And now, I was out of water. 3 granola bars left. That was it. I needed to act. I had figured out its routine, roughly. It wouldn't go out again for hours. I could leave. I could sneak out, vanish into the woods, and be gone before it ever knew I was here. But I couldn't. Adrian was still in there. But why? My mind whispered. Because he's my friend, I shot back. Is he? Would he do the same for you? Of course. He wouldn't leave me behind. Asterisk, really? That's why he tried to trip you? Why he almost threw you off that cliff? Asterisk, I clenched my jaw. Asterisk, that wasn't real. He was just joking around. Asterisk, was he? He was upset. How upset do you think he'd be? Waiting in this cave to rescue you? I swallowed hard. Would he have left by now? Maybe. But that wasn't the point. I wasn't him. You could leave right now, no. Who cares if you save your friend and die in the process? I do. Do you really think that thing doesn't know you're here? A cold knot tightened in my gut. What? Asterisk, that thing is playing with you. It's stalking you. Waiting for you to make a mistake. Asterisk, no. I'd outsmarted it. I'd learned its routine. Keep thinking that. Maybe you can outsmart its teeth when it's chewing you to pieces. I refused to listen. I wasn't leaving yet. In a conversation, my mind went silent. But doubt gnawed at me. Was it toying with me? Did it really not know I was here? And more than anything, why hadn't it killed me yet? Adrian, was the monster leaving him alive to bait me in? The thought slithered into my mind, sinking its claws deep. Panic rose in my chest. I pushed the clothes aside, and the dull glow from the cave mouth spilled in, beckoning me. The light whispered that the coast was clear, that I needed to go. Now, my muscles tensed, ready to rise and run. I shoved the clothes further aside, clearing my path. Then, a sound. I froze. In one swift motion, I buried myself back under the clothes, barely stopping my movement when, thud, the monster lumbered through. It paused, right in front of me, sniffing the air. My lungs screamed for air, but I refused to breathe. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, without warning, it turned back toward the mouth of the cave and disappeared. I waited. 1 full minute. Then, finally, I exhaled, my body shuddering in relief. My own stupidity had nearly got me killed. I had been so sure the thing wouldn't leave the cave again for hours. Yet it had gone out within minutes. How much else had I been wrong about? Doubt crept in like a disease, poisoning my thoughts. I couldn't do this anymore. It was time to leave. I clawed my way out from under the clothes and started toward the mouth of the cave. Then I stopped, turned back. I had to try one last time to get Adrian out. The fire pit glowed softly as I entered the main chamber. A fresh fire, which meant I didn't have much time. Adrian was still lying there, motionless. I knelt beside him, whispering, "Asterisk, time to go, buddy." Asterisk, no response. Asterisk, I know it's going to be tough, but you have to try. Asterisk, I grabbed his shoulders, shaking him gently. Asterisk, come on, man, wake up. Asterisk, nothing. Then, something felt wrong. My hands hesitated on his shoulders. Something was off. One shoulder was either dislocated or broken, and yet Adrian didn't even flinch. And the other thing, his skin, it was cold, not just a little chilly from the cave air. Stone. Cold. My chest tightened. Asterisk, Adrian? Asterisk. I pressed my fingers to his neck, feeling for a pulse. Nothing. His skin was as cold as his shoulders. Dread crawled up my spine as I gave his body a push. He flopped onto his back, unnatural, lifeless. I tried to move his arms, but they wouldn't budge. Rigor mortis. I staggered backward, shaking my head. My friend was gone. And worse, I had wasted all this time trying to save him. I had risked everything. Maybe I had killed myself in the process. A sob ripped from my throat before I could stop it. I wiped my tears and took a shaky breath. I couldn't break down. Not here. Not now. Forcing my grief aside, I gently repositioned Adrian's body exactly how I had found him. If I wanted any chance at survival, that thing couldn't know I was here. I stepped into the fire's smoke, letting it wash over me, hoping, praying, it might help cover my scent. Then, after a final look at Adrian's still form, I whispered a silent goodbye and left. Back at my hiding spot, I crawled beneath the clothes one last time. I would escape tonight. This would be the last time I hid, waiting for death to pass by. I closed my eyes, letting exhaustion pull me under. Sometime later, I woke to the sound of the monster returning. I waited, listened, then silence. It was time. Slowly, carefully, I packed my bag. As strange as it sounded, I knew I would miss this place. It had been my refuge for 2 days. Even though it was a graveyard, I took one last look at my makeshift hiding place and rearranged the clothes, making sure nothing looked out of place. Then, I turned toward the cave mouth and started walking. Blinding light. The late afternoon sun hit me like a wall, making me squint against the sudden brightness. I had forgotten how blazing the sun could be after days of darkness. As my vision adjusted, my first problem made itself painfully clear. I stood at the edge of a sheer drop, 50 to 80 feet down. My stomach plummeted. No wonder people never entered this cave. They couldn't. I scanned my surroundings, heart pounding. There had to be a way down. Then I saw them. Vines, hanging from the trees, swaying slightly in the breeze. They might support my weight. The problem? They were just out of reach, barely a foot too far, close enough to tempt me. I had to try. I leaned forward, stretching my fingers, but my foot slipped on the loose rock. For one terrifying second, my balance wavered. I barely caught myself before I tumbled over the edge. My breath came in ragged gasps. I needed another way, but there wasn't one. I had to go for it. Backing up a few steps, I took a deep breath. Then I ran. At the last second, I leapt. My hands grasped the vines, but I was already falling. I wrapped my legs around them, squeezing with everything I had to slow my descent. Pain seared through my hands and thighs as the rough bark scraped my skin. But I held on. I had to hold on, because if I let go, I was dead. Scream. The cave was still too close. Even sliding down the vines might have been too loud. My hands were failing. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. One by one, my fingers let go, and I fell. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs. Pain exploded across my back, but my backpack had cushioned most of the blow. I gasped, unable to breathe for a few agonizing seconds. When I finally sucked in air, I turned my head, but the cave opening was gone. I squinted, scanning the rock face. Nothing. It must have been invisible from ground level. I didn't have time to think about that. I had to get out of here. The sun was setting. That told me which way was west. My car, my salvation, was about 2 miles south, waiting at the trailhead. I trudged through the trees, forcing my aching body to move. Then I stumbled onto a trail. Relief surged through me as I stepped onto the dirt path. Then I heard it, a rustling in the brush behind me. I froze. Slowly, I turned toward the sound. A mountain lion. Not the monster I had just escaped, but it didn't matter. If this thing was hungry, I was dead. I forced myself to keep walking. Casual. Controlled. Don't run. That's what they said, right? I picked up my pace, turning my walk into a power walk. The lion followed, closing the distance. Still not running, but I felt its presence looming behind me. I tried to recall survival tips. Asterisk, make yourself big. Don't turn your back. Don't run. Asterisk, don't run. That last part became laughable when, suddenly, it pounced. A weight slammed into me from behind, driving me to the ground. I barely had time to react before I felt claws scrabble in my backpack. It was on top of me, climbing up, its hot breath against my fingers as I shielded my head. I braced myself, then as quickly as it attacked, it stopped. The lion sniffed the air, and in an instant, it leaped off me and vanished. I lay there, stunned. Then I noticed the forest was silent. A predator only runs like that if something bigger is nearby. My stomach turned to ice. I knew what had scared it off, and it was coming for me. Fight or flight. There was no choice. I ran. Adrenaline surged through my veins, drowning out exhaustion. Pain burned through my legs, a stitch stabbed my side, but I didn't stop, because it was chasing me. I heard it, a galloping sound. For half a second, my mind refused to believe it. Was I being chased by a horse? No. No, I knew better. I fumbled in my pocket, yanking out my keys. I wasn't going to be one of those horror movie idiots who dropped them at the last second. I hit the unlock button. Beep, beep. My car. It was right there. I reached for the door, ripped it open, and dove inside, just as a nightmare landed on my hood. I froze. Transfixed. It was wrong. A beast that looked like a dog, but twisted. Distorted. 8 feet tall, at least. Its mouth dripped with saliva, its razor-sharp fangs red with blood. It stared at me through the windshield, eyes glowing like embers from the pit of hell. Then it attacked. A massive clawed paw slammed into the glass, cracking it. I snapped out of my daze, turning the key. The engine roared to life. Another smash, this time the windshield broke. Shards of glass rained down as the thing shoved its snout inside, snapping at me. I threw the car in reverse, slammed my foot on the gas, and spun the wheel. The beast tumbled off with a thud. I yanked the gear into drive and floored it. The tires screeched in protest, but I didn't care. I was escaping until the roof caved in. It had landed on top of me. The entire car shook as it pounded against the metal. Claws tore through the roof, puncturing the fabric lining above my head. I swerved violently, trying to shake it off. The tires screamed. The frame groaned under the added weight. If I flipped, it was over. I was going too fast. Up ahead, a turn. I wouldn't make it. I made a split-second decision, slammed on the brakes. The beast flew off, tumbling across the asphalt. I stomped the gas, swerved around it, and gunned it. I wanted to run it over. But if I wrecked my car, I was done. Survival was all that mattered. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my blood ran cold. It was chasing me. Fast. Too fast. It leapt. Aiming for the car again, I swerved just in time. It hit the pavement, rolling in a heap. I took another sharp turn, and I was on the state road. Finally, my speed climbed, and at last I lost it. I didn't drive home. I went straight to the police station. After waiting forever, I finally sat across from an officer. At first, he barely paid attention. Then, as my story unfolded, other officers gathered around. By the time I finished, 6 of them were listening. The first officer smirked. "That's one hell of a story." I clenched my fists. Asterisk, it's true. Asterisk. He sighed. "Listen, son. We don't have time to go monster hunting in the woods." I slid a piece of paper toward him. "What's this?" "My GPS coordinates," I said. Asterisk, that's the cave. There's evidence inside. Asterisk, the officer barely glanced at it. I took a deep breath. Then, I unzipped my backpack and dumped its contents onto his desk. Clothes. Bloodstained. Torn. Belonging to people who never made it out of that cave. The officer's face changed. The room went silent. I leaned in. Asterisk, test the DNA. Asterisk, asterisk, he swallowed hard. "You're serious?" I stood, shouldering my backpack. Asterisk, if it's not too much trouble. Asterisk, then I walked out. I climbed into my destroyed car, praying it would start. As I drove home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, over and over, because after everything, 2 thoughts wouldn't leave my mind. 1, I was barricading my house the second I got home. And 2, I would never sleep soundly again. Asterisk, asterisk, hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Asterisk, asterisk, if you have a scary story you'd like me to narrate, send me an email or post it to my subreddit. Details are in the description. A huge thank you to my channel members and patrons. Your support gives you early access to videos and behind-the-scenes content. Thanks for listening. And remember, stay safe out there.